This is probably my favorite tweet ever. About 5 years ago, Lionel Richie was experimenting with Twitter, and he sent out one tweet, and it just said, "hello." And the internet went mad, and everybody loved it, and he got very scared and then never tweeted again, and has recently started, but anyway, hello. My name's Amelia. I'm a planner. I started a business called the Fawnbrake Collective that I'll talk to you a little bit about later. And I guess this is kind of me. I always think that Instagram is a really nice personal mood board of somebody. So you'll see lots of travel, lots of London, some food, some children, and that's kind of a good snapshot of who I am. I started life as a WPP fellow in 1997 and got into digital and technology back then. So I've spent the last 20 years immersed in this world, but kind of straddling the world of brands and technology, strategy and innovation. And I've been really lucky. I've worked for some amazing companies in the States and in the UK, and I'm trying to sort of bring it all together. I recently did a project with Wharton around the future of advertising and beyond advertising. So this is a world that I care deeply about and I love, but I can see a lot of things that are wrong with it, and I'm trying to do something to make a difference. So I started this business, the Fawnbrake Collective. I'm not going to explain what it is, and this is definitely not a sales pitch, but what I will do is talk to you a little bit about the story behind the founding and some of the principles that we took out and what we're trying to do, because I think they're really important. I don't think that our model is the model, because I don't think there is a model to solve this, but I do think that the questions that we asked are the questions that everybody in this room should be asking. So the IAB asked me to come and talk today about change and about embracing an ever-changing future. And it's a brilliant topic, because if we think about today, it's filled with change. Think about how we all operate today. We've got to do more with less. We've got to move faster. We've got to think smarter. There aren't any set rules. There's no playbook. And all of us have to work it out. Each and every one of us in each and every business, it's going to look kind of different. So if the starting point and the premise of today is the only constant that we have is change, the only thing that unifies us and binds us all together is change, we better get used to it. Because it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, it doesn't necessarily feel fun, but it kind of is what it is. And people have talked a lot about this. Now is the new normal. There's a wonderful phrase, which is, we're all Uber's children. And it starts with Uber, and it starts with taxi cabs, and it starts with the desire to click a button, and you can see straight away who's nearby. And then they come, and they find you within minutes. But that changing expectation happens in dating. It happens in pizzas. And I guess the next logical conclusion is what happens when people start to expect that in education and in healthcare and in the way that they work with agencies and companies. So now is the new normal. Voice is the new normal. There's a wonderful clip on YouTube, which I'm sure you've all seen, of the little kid trying to swipe a magazine from a couple of years ago and getting massively frustrated that it's not an iPad. And I caught my children last week shouting at the television, wanting it to change channels, and getting really frustrated that the television wasn't listening and responding to them. And in a way, I thought, well, that's progress, because normally they just shout at me and expect me to do it. At least they're shouting at an inanimate object. But voice is the new normal. As Caroline said earlier, machine learning is the new normal. Whether it's Spotify or whether it's Amazon, machine learning is the new normal. There's nothing revolutionary about that. And as sort of a snapshot into my odd world of times tables, Hamilton, digital Darwinism, anyway, the snapshot into my Amazon life. I also think in this new world of constant change that normal changes really fast. So this is my perspective from London. I think it's incredible now that I go in and buy a coffee, and I find it odd if there's only milk on the menu, if there's only dairy, if there's no oat milk or coconut milk or almond milk, I find it odd. And actually now, in my world in London, in the UK, that's my new normal. Of course there's going to be those options. I think about, again, veganism. I think that actually now it's not enough to be vegetarian. that actually it's the new normal, certainly in big cities, for veganism. Where are the vegan alternatives on the menu? The last straw, so the big campaign against plastic straws. I feel guilty now if I get a plastic straw. I take it back and say no. That's kind of normal now. It's the same with plastic bags that you get it. A year ago, 2 years ago, people were very happy to get bags and then not think about it. But actually, our consciousness changes very quickly. You know, it's not just gay marriages, it's gay divorces. Normal changes really fast. And I think this is really key when you think about the world that we all live in, that amazement changes to expectation very, very quickly. And I love that thought. I mean, I find it terrifying, but also incredibly grounding. That actually we move from wow to now within the space of months, and I think it's only going to get faster. And that sense of speed is something, again, that I keep coming back to in the work that I do and the clients that we talk to, which is we think the pace of change is fast now, but I can promise you it will never, ever be this slow again. We will look back on 2018 and be amazed that things were changing as slowly as they are. And then you start to think about the sort of the change comfort zone. And actually the question that everybody needs to ask themselves in the room today is, on that comfort zone, where do they sit? And it's a personal question, and there is no right or wrong answer, because at one end, you're totally in a comfort zone. It's fine, it's not an issue at all. Can't see what people are getting so uptight about. I've totally got this. To the other end of the comfort zone spectrum, which is I'm absolutely petrified. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't work, I'm paralyzed with fear. But actually trying to work out where you fit on that comfort zone, I think is really important, because it helps you work out how you're going to navigate and how you're going to succeed. I had a boss who was an Olympian called Seb Coe, or Lord Sebastian Coe. And he used to work at the same agency as me a couple of years ago. And he said that at the beginning of every race, he was petrified. He wasn't physically being sick, but he was absolutely filled with nerves. And one of the things he said to me very early on, which I've always remembered, which is, it's okay to be scared. But what it's not okay to be is to not use that fear. And he talked about the nervous energy that sort of in the pit of your stomach before a race is what you have to learn to harness and to change into something positive. And I just thought that it was such a great mantra, which is, it's fine to be scared, it's fine to be nervous, but what you've got to do is work out how you harness that energy and convert it to something useful. Justin Trudeau was at Davos earlier this year, and he said something that really resonated with me. He said, you're rightly anxious about how quickly our existing business models are being disrupted. Still, if you're anxious, imagine how the folks who aren't in this room are feeling. And I just thought it was an absolutely brilliant and insightful thing to say. And I kind of feel like it's the same with all the people in the room today, which is you're in the room. And the fact that you're in the room when these discussions are happening, the fact that the brands that you represent, the companies you work for, have amazing power. And, you know, as Star Wars says, with great power comes great responsibility. You're in the room when the conversations are happening. And that's a huge privilege to have, because the vast majority of people aren't in the room when it's happening. I think going back to that comfort zone, one of the things that I often tell people who I work with is that actually, if you're not out of your comfort zone, you're stuck in a rut. And the worst place you could possibly be in 2018 is stuck in a rut, because a rut is really hard to get out of. And actually, at some point, I would argue that actually the job will become obsolete and somebody else or something else can do it better. So actually, it's great. Get out of a comfort zone. Feel uncomfortable, feel nervous, feel scared, because the opposite of that is actually, in my opinion, is foolish, because you should be scared and you should be nervous. But actually, the opportunity is what you do with that. So if you're not out of your comfort zone, you're stuck in a rut. But because actually what all of us need to do is think differently about change. And I guess that's the whole point, really, of these last 2 days, and I think what all of us need to take out and when we get on our flights and head home. I think we need to think differently about change, and I think we need to try and configure how we work, what we work on, who we work with and who we work for. I think we need a different operating system. And I was talking to somebody over lunch about this idea about a new operating system, because it's not a new agency and it's not a new structure and it's not a new, I don't know, it's not about OKRs. What it's about is an operating system that's optimized to change, as opposed to an operating system that's optimized for the status quo, which is kind of what I'd argue most of us are operating in at the moment. So this is kind of the question. If you were going to start and try and build that operating system, what would it look like? And I sort of had this thought. I've been having this thought for quite a long time. But I would be going out for coffee and I'd sort of talk about, if you were going to start something, if you were going to truly think again and build from sort of ground up, what would you do? And I'd always be having coffee with somebody, and I'd always say, if we were going to start something, let's call it tabletop, I'd say you'd take everything off the tabletop. You wouldn't tweak around the edges. You would take everything off the tabletop, and you'd start again. You'd strip out the structures, you'd strip out the processes, and you'd work out what do clients value, what do clients need, what do clients want and pay for, how does talent want to work? And actually, if you start from that perspective, and if you take everything off the tabletop, you can start to think about how you create an operating system that's better optimized for the 21st century and better optimized for change. So I kind of had this moment it would have been last spring actually, which I call my Jerry Maguire meets train spotting moment. And if you remember Jerry Maguire, which I do because I was probably a teenager at the time, but there's that moment when Jerry, Tom Cruise, looks at the industry he's in and he just goes, this is broken. This isn't right. We've forgotten what we do and we're doing it the wrong way. And he gets up and he takes the goldfish with him and he writes his memo and he leaves. And then I sort of thought about, again, probably about the same time actually, train spotting with this whole manifesto about choose life, choose a job, choose a career, choose a family, choose a big, maybe I'm not allowed to swear, but a big television. And these two kind of met. And I was talking at Google, and I was talking at an event that they call Firestarters, and I was supposed to be talking about the future of planning and what's the point of planning and where's this all going for planning. And actually what I did is I just sort of stood up and I kind of said this, and I said, there are too many agencies chasing too few briefs from the stranglehold of intermediaries for too little money, predicated on a best guesstimate fee at the start of an engagement where the answer could be anything, which in turn is founded on the antiquated notion of FTE, so full-time equivalent percentage breakdowns, which is bullshit, charging people by the hour like a cheap hotel. Agencies have shafted employees by deprioritizing training at a time when new skill sets are changing and growing in importance, and planners have believed they're the third creative moniker because it makes them feel sexy, without realizing that any notion predicated on the idea that there are two creatives is bogus. Strategic eyes have turned to backslappy awards and can, not impact and results. We forgot that we sell or else. We forgot that talent is short. Talent is all, life is short. And I really wanted to just get a lot of stuff off my chest about what I was seeing was wrong with the industry. And I guess partly the backstory as to why I was so angry, it plays quite a big role in what I was trying to do. So I spent a lot of time last year in this beautiful building which looks like a historic museum, but is actually a hospital in London. And it's very beautiful. It's called St. Bartholomew's, and it dates from 1123. It's just gorgeous. If you're ever in London and you've got some time, it's worth going into. It's got the most beautiful church in the middle of it, which is from the late 12th century, and it's just wonderful. But I spent a lot of time in that hospital last year because I was with my mum, who's there with my little boy called Felix, and she was dealing with a terminal cancer diagnosis. And I think when somebody you love and is close to you deals with something like that, you really start to think differently about the here and now. And there's a great Martin Luther King quote where he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And I think that happens when you're with somebody who's looking at a short time frame. And I think it can't help but make you think about how you spend your time and the impact that you do and what you work on and who you work with and how you work and what are the things that really matter. And I think partly that's why I stood up at Google, a year and a bit ago, to say there has to be something different. Because my mum was an extraordinary woman who did a huge amount and actually lived a very fulfilling and a very impactful life and left a really positive footprint. And I guess I suddenly sort of looked at the world that I was living in, and I suppose I sort of went, you know, I'm not sure what footprint I'm leaving behind. And it's the old Albert Einstein, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It kind of felt like everybody in the industry was talking the same thing, and I just felt I'd been to so many events and round tables, and I've just like, enough already. Like, it has to change. We've got to stop complaining and just start doing something very different. And the operating system has to change. This is the classic Dick Fosbury photo from the Mexico City Olympics, which was actually 50 years ago. It was in exactly 50 years ago in 1968. And it's the classic photo indicating change, because until Fosbury came along, everybody jumped over the high jump, they went forward, and then they did a forward roll, and that's how they did it. And when Dick Fosbury ran up to the bar and went backwards, there was an audible gasp, because nobody had ever jumped backwards over a pole. It goes against everything that you possibly think. And actually, he jumped higher than anybody had ever jumped before. And that record was set for many, many years. And every single person after him jumped in the same way as him, but he had to be the first. It kind of felt like this is the time for us all to start jumping backwards over some high poles. Because business as usual isn't cutting it. And we know that. You know, this is business as usual. That's business as usual. That's business as usual. You buy a door handle and suddenly they're chasing you around the internet. And actually, this is business as usual, which is kickbacks on deals and backhanders, which is business as usual. And how we work today is wrong. It's the 20th century structures that we try and tweak around the edges, but we haven't fully taken everything on the table. And I don't believe that enough organizations have properly restructured for the 21st century. I certainly don't see it where I work. This was a tweet that was from about 2 weeks ago. And I think it's kind of interesting. The only thing I guess I would sort of push back is I don't think it's status symbols. I actually think it's about how people want to work. But I guess I would say 20th century, luxury goods, position of authority, busyness, endorsed by the establishment. And my belief is that actually the 21st century is about fitness and position of influence and flexible schedule and creative output and self-actualization and independence and being anti-fragile. And I just love this tweet because it sort of captured for me what I think we all need to be doing and how we all need to be working. And then Martin, who many years ago gave me my first job, so I'll be forever thankful for him because lots of agencies didn't, but he did, so thank you and good luck in whatever you do. But he spoke at IAB Europe, and he said that in the future, agencies need to be more responsive, less bureaucratic, more agile, less layered, and more principled. And then when he said that, I was like, my goodness, he's just described the company that I've just launched. I couldn't agree with you more. But I think Martin is a very insightful and very clever man. I think he's put his finger on it. If you were going to think about the key descriptors, those are exactly what companies need to be. So I started this thing called the Fawnbrake Collective. I talk about it's not an ad agency, it's not a tweak or an update or a refresh. We talk about redesign of creative working structures for better ideas and smarter strategies. And we talk about us being a new operating system for brands. I'll talk to you a little bit about how it works. But the premise is that the way that most agencies work, which is all about layers and longer, you add in as many people as possible. Actually, if it takes 3 months, it's better for you, is not the way that most clients want to work. In our experience, what most clients are looking for is very fast, very flat, very flexible, a much more agile approach, a much more hack approach, get a gang of people, smart people in a room together and run at a problem very quickly and prototype a solution. And what we find interesting is that in our experience, clients are very willing to pay for that, but what they don't want to do is pay for 18 levels of account execs and of this, and they don't even know them, and they don't know the value. And I think the frustrations are building to a point on the client side and on agency side that are just really close to breaking at the moment. So we've got some sort of principles which we tend to define as hashtags, and I thought I'd share them because I think they should be useful and applicable to anybody in the room. The first is a belief in impact, not hours. So if you can get away from how many hours is somebody going to work on this piece of business to what's the project, what's the value, and then you come to a decision about what this is worth. I think one of the worst things that we've possibly done is reduced it to an hourly rate, which has just, I think, destroyed so many things. So actually, the impact, not hours, was one of our first sort of philosophies. The second is this idea about access, not ownership. And I think it was interesting, there was somebody from Spotify here earlier. You don't need to own your music, you just need to have access to it. And it's the same with talent within the creative industries. That actually the idea that one corporation can sort of quote unquote own all the talent that they need, that all the talent comes in with their lanyard at 9 o'clock in the morning and stays there till 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or whatever time at night, is just a very antiquated notion. So actually one of the things at Fawnbrake that we did is we've said we only want 2 employees, so myself and my co-founder. Everybody else are independent, self-employed that we pull in, and we work on different projects. So we talk about customized teams, we talk about bespoke solutions, and a bit like the old graphic equalizers on a hi-fi, you dial up and you dial down according to needs. So this idea about when it comes to talent, companies need to be thinking about access, not ownership. This was really important for us, and I guess it goes back to something that Martin Sorrell said, which is actually more principled. This idea about principles and good behavior and actually doing the right thing. Not everything that can be monetized should be monetized. There has to be some morality put back into business, and there has to be, we call it karma, not kickbacks. You have to believe that what goes around comes around, and it's not about squeezing every penny out in every day, in every month. There is something bigger, and certainly we've really started to I guess, to get off on a different foot. So this idea about karma, not kickbacks, is inherent to how we operate. We talk a lot about skill sets, not structures. So again, it was very apparent to us that the structures were getting in the way. And I guess by that I mean the structures of the clients, but also primarily the structures of agencies, made it very hard for people to do business because people were being billed out at 185%, that literally and sort of figuratively, they were skating on thin ice. They didn't have the time to do the projects. They were rushing into a client meeting. They hadn't properly prepared. It felt like everybody was skating very fast. But actually, the skill sets that were housed inside the structures were phenomenal. And the talent was unbelievable, but the frustration that the clients couldn't access that talent was palpable. So if you start thinking about skill sets, not structures, it takes you to a kind of a different operating point. We also think about MVTs. So, in the world of software, you think about MVPs, minimal viable product. We think about minimal viable team. What that doesn't mean is bad team. What it does mean is what's the smallest amount of people that we can that we can put on a project to get it done in as short a time as possible, in as excellent a way as possible. So again, in the old agency land, layered and longer, lots and lots of people throw bodies at the project to justify the scope of work. We take completely the opposite view, which is actually the smaller teams, the better, because if we're being paid £50,000 for a project and there are 2 of us or 3 of us, that's a great project if it takes 2 weeks. If there are 20 of us and it takes 3 months, £50,000 is a less interesting project. So minimal viable team starts to make you think in a different way. It's kind of our mantra, but you've got to think faster, you've got to think flatter, and you've got to think more flexibly. And if you can design that operating system for that, honestly, it doesn't necessarily look like Fawnbrake looks, but those principles will get you to somewhere very different and very, very useful. And this is kind of the final sort of point, which I really like. It's this thought about always day one. And you may remember it from a phrase. I think Jeff Bezos wrote a memo. I think it was like 1998. It was definitely in the last century. And he talked about Amazon being a day one company. And again, I read it years ago, but it always struck me as being very profound. So he talked about Amazon as a day one company. Day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And although maybe it's slightly, there's slight hyperbole in that, I guess I really buy the sentiment, which is you've really always got to feel like you're in day one. The moment that you're a day two company, you're in your comfort zone. And as we talked about, if you're in your comfort zone, you're stuck in a rut. So I love this idea about always day one. And then it was funny, I was sort of thinking about it, and then as those sort of serendipitous moments happen, I was in a stationery shop at St. Pancras, and they sold diaries that didn't have dates in it, but they just had 365 days starting with day one. And I sort of took that as a sign, and I went and sharpened a pencil and sort of thought about blank pages and that philosophy of day one, which I just think is so important. And really just to finish, this idea about the opportunities that change creates, the opportunities for everybody. Change creates opportunities and more change. And the final thought I'd like to leave with you today is that actually all of us have the power and have the opportunity to change the rules. So thank you.